In the middle of the 19th century, New York City was a place of constant motion, but very little peace. It was a city that never truly rested, not because it was thriving comfortably, but because it was struggling to keep up with itself. Every day the island of Manhattan absorbed more people, more noise, more smoke, more weight than it had ever been designed to carry. The city was growing faster than anyone could control, and the strain showed in every street and every breath drawn by the people who lived there. Imagine Manhattan in the 1840s, long before glass towers and glowing signs. The streets were narrow and uneven, many of them unpaved. After rain, they turned into rivers of mud mixed with horse manure and garbage. Wooden planks were laid across the worst sections so people could cross without sinking ankle deep. The smell never left. Coal smoke drifted from factories and homes, mixing with the odor of rotting food, animal waste, and stagnant water. Even those who had lived there all their lives struggled to escape it. The city was loud in a way that never faded into the background. Horses clattered endlessly over cobblestones. Cartwheels groaned under heavy loads. Street vendors shouted their prices from dawn until night. Metalworks hammered without pause, and ships arriving at the harbour added their own chaos with whistles, chains, and shouting dockworkers. There was no quiet hour. Even at night, the city breathed heavily, restless and unsettled. By the 1840s, more than 500,000 people were packed into Manhattan, a number that continued to rise with every arriving ship. Immigrants poured in daily, Irish families escaping famine, German craftsmen seeking work, others driven by wars, poverty, or simple hope. They arrived exhausted, carrying bundles of clothing and expectations that reality rarely met. The city took them in, but it did not welcome them gently. Tenement buildings rose quickly, often 5 or 6 stories tall, thrown together with little concern for light, air, or safety. Entire families lived in single rooms. Windows faced brick walls or dark alleys where sunlight never reached. Water had to be carried from shared pumps. Outhouses served dozens of people. Disease spread easily in such conditions, and illness was a constant companion. Children played wherever space allowed, often between slaughterhouses and factories, breathing air thick with soot that settled on their skin and clothing. For many New Yorkers, life became a cycle of work and exhaustion. Long hours in factories or workshops were followed by crowded nights in rooms that never fully cooled or quieted. There was little escape from the press of bodies and buildings. The idea of space, of greenery, of silence, felt distant and unreal, like a luxury meant for someone else. The city did have small public squares, scattered here and there, but they were few and inadequate. These patches of grass were often shared with carts, animals, and vendors. Children ran through them while adults hurried past. The largest green space in all of Manhattan was Battery Park at the southern tip of the island, barely 10 acres. For a city bursting beyond its limits, it was almost nothing. As the population grew, so did the sense that something essential was missing. People spoke of progress and prosperity, yet the city felt increasingly oppressive. Even those with wealth and influence found themselves worn down by the constant pressure of urban life. The city offered opportunity, but it demanded everything in return. The air itself seemed heavy. Smoke from factories and coal stoves lingered between buildings, trapped by narrow streets and dense construction. On warm days, the heat intensified the smells and made breathing feel like effort rather than instinct. On cold days, the smoke thickened as fires burned continuously for warmth. Either way, the city never truly cleared its lungs. There was also a growing awareness that this way of living could not continue indefinitely. Reports of disease outbreaks, rising crime, and deteriorating living conditions circulated through newspapers and conversations. Reformers spoke of sanitation, housing, and public health, but solutions were slow and often blocked by politics or cost. The city was rich in ambition, but poor in foresight. For those who walked its streets daily, New York felt like a place that demanded endurance. People adapted because they had no choice. They learned to live with noise, to ignore smells, to accept overcrowding as normal. But beneath that acceptance lay a quiet longing for relief, a place where the city loosened its grip, even briefly, a place where the air felt lighter. Some New Yorkers had travelled abroad and seen cities that offered such relief. They had walked through wide parks where trees softened the noise and grass stretched farther than the eye expected. They had seen families resting under open skies, children running freely, and adults lingering without urgency. Compared to that, New York felt unfinished, unbalanced, and harsh. The contrast was unsettling. Here was a city that called itself modern and powerful, yet it failed to provide its people with something as basic as space to breathe. The idea that a city should offer beauty and rest to everyone, not just the wealthy, had not yet taken hold in America. In New York, land was for building, selling, and profiting, not for pausing. As days passed and years stacked upon one another, the city continued to press inward on itself. Buildings grew taller, streets grew busier, the harbour grew more crowded. The rhythm of life accelerated, leaving little room for reflection or stillness. People adapted outwardly, but inwardly, many felt the same quiet strain. This was New York before relief, before balance, before intention shaped the land. It was a city alive with energy and promise, but also one slowly suffocating under its own success. A city that could feed ambition but starved the human need for calm. A city that moved constantly, yet offered no place to rest. In those years, the absence of green space was more than an inconvenience. It was a sign of something deeper, a failure to recognize that people need more than work and shelter. They need air that feels clean. They need silence, even briefly. They need places where the weight of the city lifts, if only for a moment. New York in the 1840s did not yet understand this. It pushed forward, louder and denser with every passing year, unaware of how close it was to its limits. The city kept growing, and the people kept enduring, breathing air that felt heavy with effort, living in a place that demanded resilience but offered little rest. It was a city alive, powerful and restless, and it was a city that could not breathe. William Cullen Bryant was not a man of loud speeches or dramatic gestures. He was known instead for his quiet presence, his measured words, and a mind shaped by poetry and observation. In a city that moved quickly and spoke loudly, Bryant listened. He watched. He noticed the details others passed by without thought, and it was this habit of noticing that led him to ask a question that would quietly alter the future of New York. Bryant had arrived in New York years earlier and had made a name for himself as a poet, journalist, and editor of the New York Evening Post. His writing carried a deep respect for nature, shaped by his early life in rural Massachusetts. Trees, open fire, LDS, and unbroken skies were not romantic ideas to him. They were memories. In New York, Those memories followed him through crowded streets and shadowed alleys, growing sharper with every contrast he encountered. Each day, Bryant walked the city on foot. He passed markets overflowing with people and goods, docks heavy with labor, and neighborhoods packed tightly with homes and lives stacked upon one another. He saw children playing in streets because there was nowhere else to go. He saw workers pause briefly at street corners, leaning against walls for rest that never truly came. He saw how the city pressed itself into every available inch. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Bryant did not see this density as progress alone. He understood its cost. He sensed how the absence of open land weighed on the spirit as much as the body. In his editorials, he wrote often about the moral and physical health of the city, believing that the environment shaped the character of its people. A city without space to breathe, he believed, would eventually harden those who lived within it. At the time, New York's leadership focused almost entirely on commerce and expansion. Streets were widened for trade, docks extended for ships, buildings raised higher to house offices and tenants. Land was valued for what it could produce financially, not for what it could offer emotionally or socially. The idea that a large portion of land should be preserved simply for rest and beauty seemed impractical, even wasteful. Bryant did not argue with anger. He argued with reason and quiet urgency. He pointed to European cities that had long understood the value of public parks. In London and Paris, green spaces were not reserved for the wealthy alone. They were shared places, open to all, where people of different classes crossed paths under trees rather than under pressure. Bryant believed New York deserved the same dignity. In 1844, he began to frame his concern more clearly. Through his newspaper, he asked a simple but powerful question. Where could the people of New York go to find relief from the city itself? It was not a question about luxury. It was a question about survival. As the city grew denser, the lack of open space became impossible to ignore, yet few were willing to confront it directly. Bryant's words did not demand immediate action. Instead, they lingered. Readers encountered his editorials during quiet moments, perhaps over breakfast or in the evening after work. His language was calm, but his message was steady. A city that cared for its people, he argued, must care for their need for air, light, and natural beauty. What made Bryant's question so powerful was its timing. Disease outbreaks had begun to worry public health officials. Crowded housing and poor sanitation were increasingly recognized as dangers, not just inconveniences. Reformers were beginning to connect environment with health, and Bryant's ideas fit naturally into this growing awareness. He gave shape to a concern many felt but could not yet express. Still, resistance remained strong. Landowners feared loss of profit. Politicians hesitated to support anything that seemed costly or uncertain. The city's poorest residents were rarely considered in such debates at all. Public space, when discussed, was often imagined as ornamental rather than essential. Bryant's challenge was to shift this understanding. He did so not by shouting, but by repeating the question in different forms. What kind of city was New York becoming? Who was it being built for? Could a city truly call itself great if it offered no refuge from itself? These were not questions with easy answers, but they demanded attention. Bryant's reputation lent weight to his words. As a respected editor and cultural figure, he was trusted by many across political and social lines. His love for nature was well known, but so was his commitment to civic responsibility. He was not proposing escape from the city, but balance within it, a place where citizens could gather without purpose beyond rest and reflection. Over time, his ideas began to take root. Other writers echoed his concerns. Civic leaders, once dismissive, began to speak cautiously about the need for a large public park. Conversations that had once seemed impractical slowly became reasonable. The question Bryant had asked did not fade, it deepened. For Bryant, the issue was deeply personal. He believed that nature offered moral clarity. In open landscapes, people were reminded of their place in the world, of limits and harmony. Without such reminders, life became narrowed by walls and schedules. A park, in his view, was not decoration. It was education, health, and quiet guidance. He continued to write, to observe, and to wait. Change did not come quickly, but Bryant understood patience. The city moved slowly when confronted with ideas that challenged profit and habit. Still, he trusted that the question itself would continue to work on the minds of those who heard it. In a city defined by ambition, Bryant introduced contemplation. He asked New York to pause, to consider what it was becoming, and to imagine something gentler within its restless motion. His question did not arrive with force, but it stayed because it spoke to a shared, unspoken need. William Cullen Bryant did not design parks or draft laws. He planted something quieter, an idea. And in a city struggling to breathe, that idea mattered more than it seemed at the time. During the mid-19th century, many Americans who traveled across the Atlantic returned home with a quiet sense of unease. Europe, with all its age and imperfections, offered something that the young and ambitious cities of the United States did not. It was not wealth or power that unsettled them, but balance. In city after city, nature had been carefully preserved alongside stone and brick, not as an afterthought, but as a necessity. In London, large public parks stretched across the city like penlungs. Hyde Park, Green Park, and Regent's Park were not hidden behind gates reserved for the elite. They were open spaces where people walked, rested, and gathered without cost. Families spread blankets on the grass. Workers paused beneath trees. Children ran freely along wide paths. These parks softened the city's edges and reminded its people that life was meant to include stillness as well as movement. Paris offered a similar lesson. Tree-lined boulevards led to gardens designed for both beauty and access. The Jardin des Tuileries and the Luxembourg Gardens welcomed citizens of all classes. Fountains, paths, and shaded benches created places for reflection and quiet conversation. Even in crowded districts, green spaces appeared deliberately placed, as if the city itself had been planned with human breath in mind. These parks were not accidents. They were the result of centuries of understanding that cities, when left unchecked, could exhaust their people. European planners had learned, often through hardship, that public green spaces were essential to health, order, and social harmony. Nature was not separate from civilization, it was woven into it. For Americans, especially those from rapidly growing cities like New York, the comparison was uncomfortable. The United States prided itself on progress, democracy, and opportunity. Yet its cities offered little space for rest that did not require payment or privilege. Open land was quickly claimed, sold, and built upon. What remained was fragmented and insufficient. New York, in particular, stood exposed by this comparison. Despite its wealth and influence, It had failed to provide its people with a single large public park. The city expanded upward and outward without pause, treating land as a commodity rather than a shared resource. To European eyes, this absence suggested immaturity. To thoughtful Americans, it suggested neglect. Newspapers and journals began to reflect this growing discomfort. Writers described European parks with admiration that bordered on longing. They asked why America, with its vast landscapes and democratic ideals, could not offer its urban citizens the same dignity. The question was not about imitation but responsibility. There was also a deeper embarrassment beneath the surface. European parks symbolized stability and foresight. They suggested that cities could grow without sacrificing humanity. In contrast, American cities appeared driven by haste and profit alone. The lack of green space felt like a confession of priorities gone wrong. Some argued that America's wilderness made parks unnecessary. After all, forests, rivers, and open land stretched endlessly beyond the cities. But this argument ignored reality. Most city residents could not simply leave their work and families to seek nature elsewhere. For them, the city was the entire world. Without accessible green space, nature might as well not exist. European parks also revealed another uncomfortable truth. They were places where social boundaries softened. Rich and poor shared the same paths, breathed the same air, and rested under the same trees. In America, where class divisions were growing sharper, the absence of such shared spaces allowed separation to deepen unchecked. The shame was quiet but persistent. It was felt most strongly by those who believed cities should uplift rather than consume their inhabitants. Reformers, writers, and thinkers began to speak more openly about what New York lacked. They did not accuse the city of failure outright, but their comparisons carried weight. Behind these discussions was a growing understanding of public health. European cities, having faced plagues and overcrowding long before, recognized the role of open space in preventing disease. Fresh air, sunlight, and movement were not luxuries but safeguards. America, still young and confident, had not yet learned this lesson fully. The contrast grew sharper as New York continued to expand. Immigrants arrived in greater numbers. Tenements grew taller, and streets became more crowded. The absence of relief became more noticeable with every passing year. Europe's parks stood as silent reminders of what thoughtful planning could achieve. For some Americans, the comparison stirred pride into action. They did not wish to see their cities dismissed as crude or careless. If Europe could offer beauty and breathing space within dense urban centers, then America could as well. The challenge was not lack of land, but lack of intention. At the same time, resistance remained. Critics argued that parks were expensive, unproductive, and unnecessary. They questioned why valuable land should be reserved for leisure rather than commerce. These arguments revealed a narrow view of value, one that measured worth only in profit and ignored long-term human cost. The sense of shame, however, was not destructive. It was reflective. It forced New York to see itself through another lens, one that highlighted absence rather than achievement. It encouraged the city to ask not only how fast it could grow, but how well. Europe's parks were not perfect, but they demonstrated a principle America could no longer ignore. Cities needed spaces that belonged to everyone, places without transactions, schedules, or demands, places where time slowed naturally and people felt less confined. As this realization spread, the idea of a large public park in New York shifted from fantasy to possibility. What once seemed impractical began to feel overdue. The comparison with Europe had done its quiet work, reshaping expectations without force. In recognizing what it lacked, America began to glimpse what it could become. The shame was not about inferiority, but about responsibility unmet. And in that recognition, a new way of imagining the city slowly took shape. Andrew Jackson Downing did not see land as empty space waiting to be filled. He saw it as something already alive, already speaking, already capable of shaping the people who lived upon it. In an age when cities measured success by how much they built and how quickly they built it, Downing measured success by harmony. His ideas were calm, deliberate, and quietly radical for their time. Downing was born in 1815 in Newburgh, New York, along the Hudson River. From an early age he was surrounded by landscapes that changed with the seasons, places where nature felt intentional even when untouched. These surroundings shaped his understanding of beauty and balance. He believed that the environment influenced character, and that poorly designed spaces could quietly damage those who lived within them. Unlike architects who focused solely on buildings, Downing focused on the relationship between structures and their surroundings. He became known as a landscape designer, horticulturist, and writer, though his influence reached far beyond titles. Through his books and essays, he spoke to a growing audience that included homeowners, planners, and civic leaders. His language was accessible, gentle, and persuasive, rather than commanding. Downing believed that public landscapes carried moral weight. He argued that exposure to natural beauty encouraged patience, reflection, and respect. In contrast, crowded and chaotic environments, he believed, encouraged agitation and division. This belief placed him at odds with the dominant spirit of rapid industrial expansion, but it also made his voice increasingly relevant. By the 1840s, Downing had begun to think beyond private gardens and estates. While he admired carefully designed homes, he understood that true civic improvement required shared spaces. He believed parks were not luxuries for the wealthy, but necessities for a healthy society. His vision extended beyond any single city. He imagined a nation shaped by thoughtful landscapes, where nature and progress coexisted rather than competed. In his writings, Downing often pointed to Europe, where public parks had long been integrated into urban life. But he did not argue for imitation alone. He believed America could create something new, something better suited to its values, a democratic landscape open to all, shaped by natural forms rather than rigid symmetry. Downing's ideas reached New York at a moment when the city was quietly searching for direction. The absence of large public green space had become difficult to defend, and conversations about reform were growing more serious. Downing entered these discussions with a vision that felt expansive rather than corrective. He did not simply want to fix a problem, he wanted to reshape how cities thought about land. He wrote about the need for large rural-style parks within cities. These parks, he argued, should feel like countryside preserved rather than gardens imposed. Winding paths, open meadows, and varied scenery would offer both physical movement and mental rest. The goal was not spectacle, but immersion. Downing believed such parks could serve everyone, nay, equally. In his view, a laborer resting under a tree and a merchant strolling along a path both benefited from the same quiet influence. Nature, he believed, did not recognize class distinctions, and parks should reflect that truth. At the time, this idea challenged social norms. Many feared that shared public spaces would encourage disorder or blur class boundaries. Downing dismissed these fears calmly. He argued that well-designed environments encouraged good behavior naturally. Beauty, order, and openness, he believed, guided people more effectively than rules alone. Downing also understood the long view. He warned that cities which failed to reserve land early would regret it later when population growth made such efforts costly or impossible. Parks, once lost as a possibility, could not be easily reclaimed. His warnings were not dramatic, but they were precise. What set Downing apart was his ability to imagine scale. He did not think in terms of small squares or ornamental gardens. He imagined landscapes large enough to allow a person to forget the city, even while remaining within it. This idea required courage, foresight, and a willingness to sacrifice short-term profit for long-term well-being. Though he never held political office, Downing's influence reached the highest levels of government. His ideas shaped conversations among planners and reformers, giving structure to feelings that had previously been vague. He provided language and vision where others are fair. Only complaint. Downing's dream was not limited to New York. He imagined parks and landscapes across America that would define a national character rooted in balance rather than excess. He believed that the young nation had a rare opportunity to plan wisely before mistakes became permanent. His life was cut short in 1852, but by then his ideas had already begun to spread. The concept of the large public park, natural in form and democratic in purpose, had entered the public imagination. Downing had helped shift the conversation from whether parks were necessary to how they should be shaped. In dreaming bigger than New York, Andrew Jackson Downing offered something rare, a vision of progress that included restraint. He reminded a restless nation that growth without thought could suffocate, but growth guided by beauty could sustain. His ideas lingered quietly, waiting to be realized by those who shared his belief that cities should nurture, not overwhelm, the people who call them home. In New York, ideas rarely became reality without passing through politics first. By the late 1840s, the thought of creating a vast public park had moved beyond quiet essays and thoughtful conversations. It had entered the political arena where ideals were weighed against power, money, and pride. What had once seemed like a gentle vision now appeared to many as something unsettling and risky. The idea was dangerous not because it threatened safety, but because it challenged priorities. New York's leaders had built their influence on expansion, trade, and visible growth. Streets meant commerce, buildings meant profit, land meant opportunity for those who could afford it. To suggest that a large portion of valuable land should remain unbuilt, untouched by rent or industry, felt almost rebellious. Politics in the city was deeply intertwined with personal ambition. Office holders were expected to deliver results that could be seen and measured. A park, especially one that would take years to complete, offered no immediate reward. It demanded patience in a culture that prized speed. It required spending public money without promising direct financial return. For many politicians, supporting such an idea felt like stepping into uncertainty. Pride also played a powerful role. New York saw itself as America's leading city, bold and unstoppable. Admitting that it lacked something essential felt uncomfortable. Comparisons to European cities, though increasingly common, were not always welcomed. Some leaders bristled at the suggestion that New York needed lessons from older nations. The city, they believed, was forging its own path. Yet the pressure to act continued to grow. Newspapers debated the issue openly. Reformers spoke of health, morality, and civic responsibility. Writers framed the absence of green space as a failure of leadership rather than circumstance. Slowly, the question shifted from whether a park was desirable to whether the city could afford not to have on. Behind closed doors, political discussions became tense. Landowners feared that a public park would disrupt property values or lead to higher taxes. Developers argued that land set aside for leisure was land wasted. Others worried about who would use such a park and how it would be controlled. The idea of large crowds gathering freely unsettled those who equated order with restriction. There was also concern about precedent. If the city invested in a park for the public good, what might it be expected to fund next? Schools, housing, sanitation reforms, all costly and complex. For some, the park represented a door best left closed. Despite resistance, momentum slowly built. Civic pride began to work in favor of the idea rather than against it. New York's leaders did not want the city to appear careless or crude in the eyes of the world. As other cities began to discuss similar projects, hesitation started to feel like weakness. The debate exposed a divide between visions of the city. One saw New York as a machine, efficient and productive, driven by commerce. The other saw it as a living community, responsible for the well-being of its people. The park became a symbol of this conflict, carrying meanings far beyond trees and grass. Public opinion played an increasingly important role. Ordinary citizens, though rarely consulted directly, expressed support through letters, editorials, and conversations. The idea of a shared space where anyone could walk freely appealed to a broad range of people. For immigrants and laborers, it suggested dignity. For reformers, it suggested order. For elites, it suggested refinement. Politicians began to sense opportunity. Supporting the park could align them with progress and moral leadership. Opposing it risked appearing short-sighted. Still, fear lingered. The cost would be immense. The logistics uncertain. The outcome impossible to fully predict. The term dangerous began to surface quietly, not always spoken aloud. Dangerous because it required the city to act collectively. Dangerous because it prioritized long-term benefit over immediate gain. Dangerous because it trusted the public with access to open space rather than controlling it tightly. Eventually, discussion turned into planning. Committees were formed, surveys were ordered, potential locations were considered. Each step forward stirred new opposition, but also renewed commitment. The idea, once abstract, was becoming tangible, and that made it harder to dismiss. Pride shifted subtly. What had once been defensive became aspirational. Leaders imagined a city that could rival Europe not only in commerce, but in culture and quality of life. A great park began to feel like a statement of maturity, a sign that New York understood its responsibility to those who lived within it. The birth of the idea was not celebrated with ceremony. It emerged slowly, shaped by argument and compromise. It carried with it uncertainty and risk, but also promise. Those who supported it did so knowing it would change the city in ways they could not fully control. Politics did not soften overnight, Pride did not disappear, but together they allowed something new to take shape. A decision to reserve space not for profit, but for people. A decision that challenged habit and expectation. In that moment, the idea crossed a quiet threshold. It was no longer just a vision held by writers and thinkers. It had become a political reality, fragile and contested, but alive. And in a city defined by bold moves and restless ambition, this may have been the most daring choice of all. When the idea of a great public park began to move closer to reality, a practical question quietly rose above all others. Where could such a park exist? In a city where land meant money, influence, and power, the answer was not obvious. Every open space seemed already claimed by ambition. And yet, the city eventually turned its attention to a place most people preferred not to see at all. At the center of Manhattan lay a stretch of land that few admired. It was rocky, uneven, and stubborn. Swamps filled its lower sections, while jagged outcrops of stone broke through the soil elsewhere. The ground resisted easy building. Streets ended abruptly. Farms struggled against poor soil, compared to the flatter, more convenient land closer to the city's edges. This area seemed uncooperative and undesirable. To many New Yorkers, it was simply the middle of nowhere, too far north to feel connected to daily life, too wild to feel useful, and too difficult to develop without great expense. Developers largely ignored it. Politicians rarely spoke of it. It existed quietly, overlooked and undervalued. This neglect made it attractive. As city planners and officials weighed their options, they quickly realized that choosing valuable land would provoke fierce resistance. Any proposal that threatened profitable neighborhoods or active commercial districts would stall immediately. The park needed space, and space in Manhattan came at a high price unless no one wanted it. The rocky center of the island offered a solution that felt logical, even clever. Since the land was difficult to build upon, it could be framed as underused rather than taken. Its irregular terrain could be described as unsuitable for housing or industry. What had once been seen as a weakness could be presented as an opportunity. Maps were studied carefully. Boundaries were drawn and redrawn. Surveyors walked the land, noting its hills, its marshes, and its scattered settlements. From a distance it looked mostly empty, especially compared to the crowded streets farther south. On paper, it appeared as a blank space waiting for purpose, but land is rarely truly empty. Though overlooked by those in power, people lived there. Small communities had formed over time, shaped by affordability and distance from the city's pressures. Modest homes stood where the ground allowed. Gardens were carved into difficult soil. Livestock wandered through open patches. Life existed quietly, without drawing attention. To decision-makers, however, these details blurred into the background. The land's reputation as unwanted made it easier to imagine reshaping it entirely. Its uneven surface seemed well suited to the naturalistic park designs being discussed. Hills could become scenic rises. Swamps could become lakes. What had resisted order could be transformed into beauty. There was also a symbolic comfort in choosing land no one valued highly. It allowed the city to believe it was not taking something precious from anyone. The decision could be framed as improvement rather than sacrifice. The park would rise where little of consequence existed, or so the story could be told. Cost played a decisive role. While the land was still expensive, it was far cheaper than developed districts. Officials justified the purchase by emphasizing long-term benefit and relatively lower immediate expense. The difficulty of the terrain became part of the argument, reinforcing the idea that the land was better suited to nature than to buildings. Distance mattered as well. Placing the park far from the city's crowded core reduced immediate disruption. It would not interfere with daily commerce or traffic. It could grow quietly while the city continued its routines. Over time, the city would expand toward it, rather than the park intruding upon the city. This choice reflected how New York thought about progress. Rather than reshaping itself, the city preferred to expand into available space. The park would not interrupt the city's rhythm. It would wait patiently for the city to reach it. There was little romance in the decision at first. It was practical, cautious, and calculated. The land was chosen not because it was loved, but because it was ignored. It did not inspire immediate pride. It simply made sense. Yet beneath this logic lay assumptio, NS, that went largely unexamined. The belief that the land was empty, the belief that it was unused, the belief that transforming it would harm no one in meaningful ways. These ideas made the decision easier, quieter, and faster. As plans solidified, the land's identity began to shift in public discussion. It was no longer described as rocky or swampy, but as spacious and promising. Its hills were reframed as natural features. Its isolation became an advantage. Language softened perception, turning neglect into potential. For many New Yorkers, the chosen location remained distant and abstract. Few had reason to travel there. Fewer still imagined it as a place of future beauty. The city's attention remained focused elsewhere, on trade, housing, and daily survival, and yet something irreversible had occurred. The land, once ignored, had been seen by power and claimed by vision. Its fate was now tied to an idea larger than itself. What had been overlooked was now essential. The decision to choose this land revealed much about the city. It showed a willingness to think ahead, but also a tendency to overlook what did not demand attention. It balanced ambition with convenience, vision with comfort. In choosing the land nobody wanted, New York believed it had found the perfect solution, a place where a park could rise without conflict, where nature could be shaped without resistance. A quiet choice made far from ceremony that would reshape the center of the island forever. At the time, it felt like a practical answer to a difficult question, a compromise between ideal and reality. The land stood waiting, unchanged for now, holding stories that few had bothered to learn, beneath a future that was already being imagined, long before the land at the center of Manhattan was traced with paths and lined with trees. It held a quieter kind of life. Beneath what would later become carefully shaped lawns and winding roads, a village existed with its own rhythms, routines, and sense of belonging. It did not announce itself loudly, and it did not attract attention from the powerful. But it was real, lived in, and deeply rooted. This community came to be known as Seneca Village, though for many years it was simply home. It lay between what would later be marked as 82nd and 89th Streets, stretching across land that the city considered rough and inconvenient. For the people who lived there, however, the land offered something rare in New York: space, relative quiet, and the possibility of ownership. Seneca Village began forming in the 1820s, decades before the park was imagined. At a time when Black New Yorkers faced severe discrimination, limited job opportunities, and constant instability, this area offered a chance to build something lasting. Land was cheaper there because others did not want it. For those pushed to the margins of the city, that neglect created opportunity. Many of the village's residents were free Black Americans, some of whom had been born into slavery and later gained freedom. Others were descendants of free families who had lived in New York for generations. Property ownership carried immense meaning for them. It offered security in a city that rarely provided it, and importantly, the right to vote, which in New York at the time depended on owning land. Homes in Seneca Village were modest but meaningful. Wooden houses stood beside small gardens. Chickens and goats were kept for food. Paths formed naturally where people walked daily, not laid out by planners but shaped by use. The village did not resemble the dense tenements of Lower Manhattan. It breathed more easily, shaped by necessity rather than profit. Churches formed the heart of the community. They were places of worship, education, and gathering. The African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church and the African Union Church stood as anchors of spiritual and social life. On Sundays, voices carried through the open land, hymns rising into air that felt freer than anywhere else in the city. Education mattered deeply to the residents. Seneca Village had a school where children learned to read and write, preparing for lives in a city that often denied them opportunity. Parents invested what they could into their children's futures, believing that learning offered a form of protection the world could not easily take away. The village was not exclusively black. Irish and German immigrants also lived there, drawn by affordable land and distance from overcrowded neighborhoods. Though tensions sometimes existed, daily life required cooperation. Neighbors shared resources, paths, and concerns. The village became a place shaped by coexistence rather than uniformity. Life in Seneca Village was not easy. Winters were cold and infrastructure was limited. Residents carried water from wells and relied on each other for support. Medical care was scarce, and work was often insecure. Yet compared to the conditions many had left behind, the village offered dignity. What outsiders often failed to see was the intention behind the settlement. Seneca Village was not accidental or temporary. It was built deliberately by people seeking permanence in a city that treated them as disposable. Land ownership allowed families to imagine futures measured in years rather than days. Despite this, the village remained largely invisible to the broader city. Newspapers rarely mentioned it, and when they did, descriptions were dismissive or distorted. The residents were portrayed as squatters or obstacles rather than citizens. Their homes were reduced to nuisances. Their lives were simplified into stereotypes. This invisibility made the village vulnerable. Because it did not fit the city's vision of progress, it was easy to ignore its value. Officials studying maps saw open land rather than lived-in space. Reports emphasized rocky ground rather than human presence. The absence of attention became a form of erasure. Yet within the village, life continued steadily. Children grew older, families expanded, gardens were planted and harvested year after year. People invested time and care into land they believed was theirs to keep. The village's existence was quiet, but its roots were deep. There was a sense of separation from the city, but also connection. Residents traveled south for work, carrying goods and skills into neighborhoods that often rejected them. At night, they returned to a place where they felt safer and more at ease. Seneca Village offered a balance that the city elsewhere could not. The irony was profound, the very qualities that made the land undesirable to developers. Its distance, unevenness, and lack of immediate profit were what allowed the village to exist at all. The city's neglect had created a rare pocket of stability for people otherwise denied it. As discussions about a great park grew more serious, this reality remained largely unspoken. The village beneath the future park did not fit the story the city wanted to tell about unused land waiting for improvement. Acknowledging it would complicate the narrative, forcing difficult questions about who benefited from progress and who paid its cost. For the residents of Seneca Village, life carried on without knowledge of the plans forming quietly around them. Days were filled with work, worship, and care for family. The land beneath their feet felt solid, earned, and secure. Beneath the future park lay not emptiness, but a community shaped by resilience and hope. Its houses may have been small, its paths informal, but its presence was undeniable. It was a village built not by ambition alone, but by the human need for belonging. For years, Seneca Village existed quietly, sustained by people who believed they had finally found a place where they could live with some measure of peace. It stood as a reminder that even land labelled unwanted can hold deep meaning, and that beneath grand visions often lie lives already in progress, waiting to be seen. In early 19th century New York, belonging was not freely given. It had conditions, costs, and barriers that shifted depending on race, wealth, and visibility. For black New Yorkers in particular, the idea of security was fragile, often dependent on circumstances beyond their control. Within this reality, Andrew Williams made a choice that reflected both courage and calculation. A choice shaped by the belief that ownership could offer protection in a city that offered little else. Andrew Williams worked as a bootblack, polishing shoes on the busy streets of Manhattan. His labor was humble and physically demanding, yet it placed him in constant contact with the city's daily life. From his position at street level, he observed people rushing past, dressed in fine clothes, carrying authority and certainty. He also understood how easily someone like himself could be overlooked or dismissed. In 1825, Williams used his savings to purchase land in the rocky center of Manhattan. The decision was deliberate. Land in more developed areas was beyond his reach, but this overlooked stretch offered possibility. By owning property, Williams gained something rare for a black man at the time, a legal claim to place and presence. Property ownership carried more than personal meaning. Under New York law, black men could vote only if they owned property worth a certain amount. This requirement did not apply to white men. For Williams, purchasing land was not only about shelter or investment, it was about citizenship. It was about being recognized by the system that governed his life. The land he bought became part of what would later be known as Seneca Village. Williams built a home there, modest but solid, and began shaping a life rooted in that soil. His decision sent a quiet message to others like him. Stability, though difficult, was possible. Ownership could offer a measure of dignity in a city that routinely denied it. Belonging, however, came at a price. Saving enough money to buy land required years of disciplined labor. Maintaining that land required constant effort, and even with legal ownership, acceptance was never guaranteed. Williams understood that property did not erase prejudice, it only offered leverage against it. Within the village, Williams became a respected figure. His purchase was among the earliest, helping establish the community's foundation. Others followed, buying nearby plots, building homes, and forming networks of support. Each deed recorded was more than a transaction. It was an act of quiet defiance against exclusion. Williams' home stood as evidence that black New Yorkers were not transient or dependent, as they were often portrayed. They invested, planned, and rooted themselves in the city's future. This challenged dominant narratives and unsettled those who preferred to see black residents as temporary presences rather than citizens. Despite this, the broader city rarely acknowledged such efforts. Newspapers described areas like Seneca Village with dismissive language, focusing on poverty rather than perseverance. Achievements like Williams's land purchase were ignored. The story of black ownership did not align with the image the city wished to project. For Williams, daily life continued within these contradictions. He worked, maintained his property, and participated in the life of the village. He attended church, engaged with neighbors, and likely took pride in the stability he had created. Yet beneath that stability lay constant awareness of vulnerability. The price of belonging was not paid once, it was paid repeatedly, through labor, patience, and restraint. Williams had to navigate a city that could change its rules or priorities without warning. Ownership offered rights, but not immunity. The ground beneath his home felt firm, but the future remained uncertain. What made Williams's story significant was not fame or influence, but representation. His life illustrated how marginalized individuals sought belonging through the few channels available to them. Property became a tool for visibility, a way to claim space in a system designed to limit access. His choice also revealed the uneven nature of democracy in New York. The city spoke of freedom and opportunity, yet imposed conditions that excluded many from full participation. Williams met those conditions at great personal cost, earning rights that others received automatically. Within Seneca Village, such stories were common, though rarely recorded. Families pooled resources, invested carefully, and protected what little they had. Their lives contradicted the notion that the land was unused or wasted. It was being shaped deliberately by people determined to belong. As the city's interest in the land grew, these individual acts of belonging remained largely unseen. Maps and reports reduced the area to acreage and terrain. The personal histories written into deeds and homes were omitted. Ownership, though legally recognized, was socially disregarded. Andrew Williams's decision to buy land was an act of hope grounded in realism. He did not expect acceptance to come easily. He understood that belonging in New York required more than presence. It required proof, persistence, and sacrifice. His life reminds us that cities are not only built by grand plans and public works, but by quiet decisions made by individuals seeking stability. The price of belonging is often paid in small, unseen ways, through years of effort that history can easily overlook. In the soil of Seneca Village, Andrew Williams placed more than a home. He placed a claim to dignity, citizenship, and recognition. His story remains a testament to the human desire to belong, even when the cost is high and the reward uncertain. In the early decades of the 19th century, Seneca Village was more than a cluster of homes. It was a community deliberately shaped by those who lived there. Nestled on the rocky hills of Manhattan, it offered residents a rare combination of independence and solidarity. Life in Seneca Village was quiet yet purposeful, governed less by the city's bustling pace and more by the rhythms of home, work, and neighborhood ties. Morning light would spill across modest homes, revealing gardens carefully tended by families who understood both the value of labor and the fragility of security. Each plot of land was cultivated not just for sustenance, but as an expression of care and permanence. Crops like corn, beans, and vegetables thrived alongside fruit trees and small orchards. These gardens were practical, providing nourishment for families, but they also symbolized rootedness, a claim to a place that many others in the city denied them. Children played in the open spaces between homes, their laughter mingling with the sounds of daily work. Lessons often happened outdoors, where older children taught younger ones practical skills, how to tend a garden, repair a fence, or weave a basket. Education in Seneca Village was informal, yet deeply valued. Learning was tied to survival, community, and culture rather than official classrooms. For many children, the village offered a stability that the broader city could not guarantee. Neighbors shared responsibilities and joys alike. Meals were communal events in subtle ways. Families exchanged eggs, milk, and baked goods. Celebrations were marked by music, storytelling, and prayer. The rhythm of life followed seasons, with planting in spring, tending in summer, harvest in fall, and preparation for winter. Each household was interconnected, forming a network of support that buffered the community against the harsh realities of city life. Religious life played a central role in Seneca Village. Churches and meeting spaces were places of solace and strength. They offered guidance, a sense of moral order, and opportunities for gathering. Here, residents could express faith and hope without fear of dismissal or scrutiny. Spiritual practices intertwined with daily routines, reinforcing the bonds between neighbors. Sermons were more than instruction, they were affirmations of identity and belonging, providing moral grounding for those navigating a world that often questioned their presence. Work defined much of daily life, yet it was not limited to external labor. Inside homes, women managed households with remarkable skill, balancing cooking, cleaning, and childcare, alongside garden and livestock care. Men labored both in the city and within the village, tending to our land, maintaining buildings, and ensuring the community's continued survival. Every task carried weight, not just for immediate needs, but for the security and future of families. Life demanded both patience and foresight. Despite the challenges, laughter and creativity flourished. Residents created small forms of entertainment, music, storytelling, and informal games filled evenings after labor had ended. These moments of joy strengthened connections and reminded everyone that life could be rich even within limitations. Stories, in particular, were vital. They preserved histories, values, and lessons that would otherwise be lost. Through tales passed down in homes and around fires, the village maintained continuity and identity. The social structure of Seneca Village was subtle but significant. Elders held respected positions, offering counsel and mediating disputes. Decisions about land, resources, or communal events were guided by consensus, reflecting a shared understanding that cooperation was necessary for survival. This system nurtured stability, fostering a sense of responsibility and accountability among residents. Individual actions affected not just the household but the broader community, reinforcing the idea that belonging came with duties as well as privileges. Challenges were unavoidable. Harsh weather, economic pressures, and the constant threat of displacement tested resilience. Fires could destroy homes, illness could claim lives, and the city's encroachment end always loomed. Yet the village persisted through adaptability, cooperation, and careful planning. Each home, garden, and boundary represented deliberate choices made to protect life and maintain autonomy. In this way, the residents of Seneca Village demonstrated that even marginalized communities could exercise agency and create meaningful, enduring environments. Seneca Village was not isolated from the city's broader currents, however. Residents participated in local markets, attended churches outside the village, and sometimes worked jobs in Manhattan. Yet the village maintained a distinct identity, a space where black families and other residents could experience freedom and stability on their own terms. It offered a quiet resistance to the pervasive inequalities of urban life, proving that a community could flourish even when the surrounding environment was indifferent or hostile. Through decades of perseverance, Seneca Village became a symbol of possibility. Its streets, modest homes, and cultivated gardens reflected careful planning, shared effort, and unspoken pride. Here, life was shaped less by wealth or social standing than by diligence, cooperation, and the determination to claim space in a city that often sought to overlook certain groups. The community embodied the idea that belonging required more than simply existing. It required creating, sustaining, and nurturing life collectively. In every aspect, home, work, faith, education, and recreation, Seneca Village offered a model of resilience. It was a place where residents exercised control over their environment, affirmed their dignity, and fostered belonging despite the broader city's indifference. The village's daily rhythm, shaped by labor, cooperation, and celebration, created a quiet harmony that contrasted sharply with the chaos and inequality elsewhere in Manhattan. Life in Seneca Village was deliberate, grounded, and enduring. Every garden tilled, every roof repaired, every story told carried the weight of both necessity and hope. Residents invested themselves fully, knowing that the rewards of belonging came not automatically, but through consistent effort, mutual support, and commitment to community. In this small patch of Manhattan, they created a world in which presence was not merely tolerated, it was cultivated, cherished, and defended with care. The city, ever-changing and restless, often moved forward without pausing to consider those who had helped shape its character. Streets that once echoed with familiar voices and laughter began to hum with the relentless momentum of construction and commerce. The same hands that had built, tilled, and nurtured neighborhoods now faced forces that seemed indifferent to their existence. In quiet moments, one could feel the unease, the sense that the city, which had once offered opportunity, could also withdraw its embrace without warning. Life in the affected neighborhoods shifted slowly at first. Families who had lived there for decades noticed subtle changes in the air, in the way surveys and maps treated their homes, and in the conversations of city officials. Decisions made in distant offices began to ripple outward, touching daily routines, land ownership, and community structures. The residents, grounded in their labor and relationships, felt the tension between permanence and impermanence more acutely than anyone outside could understand. The The marketplaces that had once been centers of exchange and camaraderie grew quieter in certain areas. Familiar shopkeepers were replaced by new establishments catering to the demands of expansion and profit. Children, once free to roam between homes and gardens, now encountered barriers and boundaries, both physical and social, that reminded them the city could shift without warning. Every fence erected, every plot acquired by others, and every new rule implemented was a quiet reminder that belonging was never absolute. Communication in these moments became vital. Families exchanged news and observations with neighbors, deciphering what might happen next. Informal networks, neighbors, friends, and local leaders carried the weight of anticipation and worry. They shared advice on how to protect property, advocate for rights, and maintain morale. These connections were lifelines, preserving cohesion amid uncertainty. In these exchanges, residents demonstrated resilience. Even when the world shifted unpredictably around them, they relied on one another, finding strength. In unity and shared experience. Religious gatherings became especially significant during such times. Houses of worship provided more than spiritual guidance. They offered spaces where concerns could be voiced, support could be received, and collective action could be considered. Sermons and prayers often addressed the challenges of displacement, injustice, and societal indifference, without naming specific policies or decisions. Faith became a quiet anchor, helping residents maintain perspective and dignity while facing forces beyond their control. The legal and political landscape further complicated daily life. Ordinances, city plans, and surveys were tools that could reshape neighborhoods almost overnight. Many residents struggled to navigate the bureaucracy, lacking formal documentation, language skills, or resources to advocate effectively. Yet they persisted, attending meetings, writing letters, and engaging in dialogue wherever possible. These acts, often small and unseen, were ways to assert presence and claim space in a system that did not always recognize them. Economic pressures added another layer of challenge. Jobs, often precarious or informal, could vanish or change with city expansion. Markets, transportation, and trade routes shifted, forcing families to adapt continually. Even routine tasks like selling produce or tending gardens became intertwined with broader forces, requiring vigilance, flexibility, and constant negotiation. Life demanded creativity and resourcefulness, as survival relied on both planning and improvisation. Children experienced these changes in ways both subtle and profound. Their play, education, and sense of security were affected by the shifting environment. Spaces once open and familiar could suddenly feel restricted, and the faces of friends or neighbors could change as families moved or were compelled to leave. Yet amidst uncertainty, children also observed resilience and adaptability. They learned to navigate the world with awareness, to value community, and to find moments of joy even when circumstances were unpredictable. Amid the broader upheaval, informal leadership emerged within neighborhoods. Elders, experienced residents, and trusted community members guided others, helping interpret policies, mediate disputes, and coordinate responses. This guidance fostered cohesion, preserving a sense of shared identity and purpose. Decisions were rarely easy, and compromises often came with emotional and practical costs. Yet the commitment to collective well-being remained a steady presence. Even as displacement loomed, the essence of life persisted. Gardens were tended, homes were maintained, and traditions were observed. Families celebrated milestones quietly, sharing meals and stories despite the looming uncertainty. Music, storytelling, and cultural practices continued, reinforcing identity and resilience. These acts were not mere rituals. They were affirmations of existence and belonging in a world that could not be taken for granted. The city's turn against its own people was gradual and complex. It was not always deliberate, but it was pervasive, manifesting in policies, urban plans, and economic pressures that overlooked long-established lives. Residents experienced both subtle exclusion and overt threats to their space and agency. And yet, even under such circumstances, human dignity endured. Community bonds, creative adaptation, and steadfast determination offered forms of protection that bricks and mortar could not provide. Through it all, families continued to claim their existence. Every repaired roof, every tended garden, and every small act of kindness reinforced that life was still possible, even in the face of forces that seemed to disregard it. The city may have shifted, yet the spirit of those living within it remained resilient, steadfast, and quietly defiant. In their perseverance, one could see the enduring truth: belonging is not granted by maps or plans. It is nurtured through care, effort, and connection. In quiet towns and bustling neighborhoods alike, a sense of stability often feels permanent until it doesn't. Homes that once seemed untouchable suddenly fall under the gaze of powerful forces, where decisions about land and life are made far from the streets where families live. The law of eminent domain, designed to serve the public good, carries weight beyond the legal realm. It quietly transforms lives, alters routines, and reshapes communities in ways that are deeply personal, even when the intentions are described as necessary or progressive. Residents first hear of change in indirect ways: a letter, a newspaper notice, or a whispered conversation at the local store. At first, the words may feel abstract. Phrases like acquisition for public use or compensation provided sound official, measured, almost impersonal. Yet behind the bureaucratic language lies profound human consequence. Families realize that what they have called home, nurtured with effort and care, might soon belong to someone else. Gardens, porches, and familiar streets, silent witnesses to years of life, face an uncertain future. Communities begin to sense a shift in daily rhythms. Streets that once thrummed with neighbors chatting over fences grow quiet as uncertainty spreads. Children, once carefree in familiar yards and alleyways, notice the presence of surveyors, construction crews, or posted notices warning of impending acquisition. Their games pause, their routines adapt, and an unspoken tension settles over playgrounds and schools. Adults grapple with anxiety that is both practical and emotional. Decisions must be made: fight for property, negotiate terms, or leave before changes are imposed. None are simple, and every choice carries costs. The process of eminent domain often separates families from the familiar fabric of life. Homes, churches, markets, and meeting places may be taken, creating both physical and emotional displacement. Familiar faces vanish as neighbors move, leaving gaps in social networks that sustain daily life. The local baker, the teacher, the gardener, each departure is a small fracture in a once tight community. These changes ripple outward, affecting relationships, support systems, and even personal identity, which often intertwines with place. Economic pressures compound the strain. Compensation, however calculated, rarely accounts for the true cost of leaving a home filled with memories and established routines. People must find new housing, often farther away, adjusting to unfamiliar surroundings while trying to preserve livelihoods and daily responsibilities. Local businesses suffer as foot traffic declines or clientele shifts, and workers may need to commute longer distances or adapt to changing markets. The city's pursuit of growth through eminent domain can thus transform not only physical spaces but entire networks of social and economic life. Emotional consequences are profound. Families mourn intangible losses, the memories tied to walls, the comfort of well-worn paths, and the reassuring presence of neighbors who have shared decades of life. Elders remember streets lined with children playing, festivals celebrated in shared gardens, and traditions passed down over generations. Young people experience displacement differently, navigating the confusing mix of hope and fear, curiosity and insecurity. The city's legal authority may be absolute, yet the human cost is immeasurable. Resistance and advocacy emerge naturally in these circumstances. Community meetings, letters to officials, petitions, and legal counsel become lifelines. Residents who have lived alongside one another for years discover collective strength, often rallying to preserve as much as possible. These efforts, whether successful or no, reaffirm agency and solidarity, creating spaces where voices are heard even when laws threaten to silence them. The act of standing together becomes as vital as the struggle itself. Despite upheaval, daily life persists. Children continue to play quietly in corners of yards that remain. Families gather for meals and neighbors support one another through shared stress. Everyday routines, cooking, cleaning, tending gardens, become acts of resilience, quiet reminders that life continues even amid uncertainty. In these small rituals, people assert continuity and claim dignity, even when the surrounding environment changes dramatically. Religious and cultural gatherings take on new significance. Places of worship and community centers become anchors, offering solace, guidance, and communal strength. They host conversations, provide legal or financial advice, and offer emotional support. Here, residents can express grief, anxiety, or hope without judgment, nurturing bonds that sustain them through transitions imposed from outside. Faith and cultural identity thus become intertwined with survival, preserving meaning and connection amid disruption. Even as eminent domain reshapes neighborhoods, informal leadership emerges. Elders, local organizers, and trusted neighbors guide residents through complex decisions. They interpret official notices, offer advice on negotiations, and mediate conflicts arising from fear, misunderstanding, or competing interests. Their knowledge and experience become invaluable, providing both practical guidance and emotional reassurance. In a world dictated by law and policy, these human connections create stability where the system cannot. Ultimately, the end of community is rarely abrupt or dramatic. It is gradual, felt in the subtle silences, the empty homes, and the shifts in everyday life. Streets, once familiar, become unrecognizable. The bonds that held people together are tested, stretched, or broken. Yet even in the face of these changes, resilience endures. connections that survive displacement, rituals that continue, and shared efforts to navigate uncertainty all affirm that community is more than just a physical place. It is a network of relationships, memories, and shared human experience. Eminent domain marks a turning point, not only in the landscape but in lives. It tests endurance, adaptation, and collective strength. But it also illuminates an enduring truth. The essence of community is carried not only in streets and buildings, but in the people who nurture it, protect it, and remember it. Even when neighborhoods are reshaped, the spirit of those who live there remains, quiet yet persistent, a testament to the life that once flourished and the human connections that cannot be legislated away. After the bustle of life slows, a strange quiet settles over places once filled with energy and motion. Streets that echoed with footsteps, voices, and laughter now carry a different rhythm, one measured by absence rather than presence. The silence is not merely a lack of sound, it is a weight, a subtle reminder of what was, what changed, and what remains. In this stillness, memories begin to speak, as though the land itself holds traces of every life that moved through it, lingering in invisible currents and familiar patterns. At first, the silence is almost unnoticed. Daily routines continue, though in smaller numbers and with a sense of incompleteness. People walk through empty corridors of their neighborhoods, passing homes with locked doors or vacant windows. The occasional creak of a gate or a distant dog barking punctuates the calm, but the ordinary hum of community, the chatter of children, neighbors greeting one another, the clatter of markets, has faded. Even the natural sounds, bird song and rustling leaves, seem amplified in contrast to human absence. Inside homes, the quiet is more intimate, pressing against the walls and filling the empty spaces once occupied by life. Families who remain feel it in subtle ways, a chair that is no longer pulled up to the table, a room left untouched, or the faint echo of footsteps that belong to someone else. These small reminders make the silence feel larger than it is, stretching across hallways, yards, and the memories stored in every corner. Objects, once familiar, become symbols of absence. A forgotten toy, a worn rug, or a collection of photographs quietly testify to the lives that unfolded here, even as the rhythm of those lives has changed. The emotional weight of this silence is palpable. Grief, though often private, permeates the atmosphere. It is a quiet grief, not marked by dramatic outbursts, but by a steady awareness of loss. People remember friends, neighbors, and loved ones who are no longer present, and the absence is felt in ordinary moments, when a door opens and no one answers, when a familiar path leads to a shuttered house, or when a familiar voice is missing from daily conversation. In this space, memory and reality coexist, layering the present with traces of the past. Daily life adapts to this new cadence, shaped by the absence around it. Tasks that once felt shared are now solitary, carried out with quiet deliberation. Preparing meals, walking to the store, or tending gardens becomes an act of continuity, a way to assert life in the midst of emptiness. Even the simplest routines carry significance, anchoring people to the world they inhabit and providing structure in the midst of transformation. In this way, silence is not only an absence, but also a canvas on which new rhythms and adaptations are drawn. Communities, though diminished, continue to exist in subtle forms. Neighbors who remain maintain quiet connections, speaking softly across fences, leaving notes, or checking in with one another in small, understated ways. These gestures, simple yet deliberate, preserve a sense of shared experience and mutual care, even when the larger structures of community have shifted. The bonds of neighbour realness endure, like threads stretched taut across distance, delicate yet resilient. This silence also allows for reflection. People begin to consider what life was like before the changes, tracing patterns of daily life, communal celebrations, and moments of joy. In remembering, there is both sorrow and comfort. Sorrow for what has been lost, and comfort in recognizing the vibrancy that once existed. The past, once taken for granted, is now honored, and its memory becomes a quiet companion, gently shaping how people move forward. Nature itself responds to this human quiet. Parks, vacant lots, and abandoned streets become spaces where grass, trees, and wildflowers reclaim ground. Birds nest in places once bustling with human activity, and small animals explore areas long abandoned. The world continues its cycles of growth, decay, and renewal, indifferent yet beautiful, and in its rhythm people find both solace and a reminder of life's persistence. Silence, in this sense, is not empty. It is fertile, allowing observation, understanding, and reflection to emerge more clearly. Inhabitants who remain develop a new awareness of time and presence. Moments stretch, and attention shifts to the small details that were once overlooked. The pattern of sunlight on a wall, the sound of wind through a broken fence, or the subtle changes in familiar landscapes. Life slows in response to the absence, creating space for contemplation and mindfulness. In this altered rhythm, people notice themselves, their neighbours, and the world around them with a depth previously unavailable amid the noise and bustle of full community life. Yet, even in silence, there is resilience. People discover ways to adapt, forming new routines, creating small pockets of life and comfort, and maintaining traditions quietly. Meals, gatherings, and simple interactions retain meaning, even if their scale is diminished. Music, letters, and stories, conveyed softly, privately, or across distances, become lifelines, carrying memory, identity, and connection through the quiet landscape. This resilience, though subtle, affirms that life endures, even when the world around it has shifted profoundly. The silence also emphasizes the importance of presence. Those who remain become witnesses to both absence and continuity. They carry the responsibility of remembering, tending, and maintaining connections, however faint, with the spaces and people they have lost. Their presence is quiet but powerful, an assertion that life persists, and that even in moments of stillness, human experience continues to unfold. Ultimately, the silence that followed is neither empty nor static. It is a space where memory, reflection, and resilience converge. It teaches attention to small details, appreciation for enduring bonds, and the subtle ways life persists even when structures and routines are disrupted. The quiet is a companion, shaping perception, deepening understanding, and allowing for a contemplative engagement. Ith both loss and survival. In this hush, people find strength, reflection, and the gentle rhythm of life moving forward, softly, persistently, and with a quiet dignity all its own. In quiet moments of history, certain individuals appear whose ideas ripple far beyond their immediate surroundings. In this story, two men emerged with a shared vision, though they came from very different worlds. One brought the careful precision of planning, the love of structures and spaces, and an understanding of human patterns in daily life. The other carried a dream tinged with imagination, passion for nature, and a belief that the human environment could reflect higher ideals. Together, their vision would stretch beyond personal ambition and become a shaping force for communities, influencing how people experience the spaces around them. The first man approached the world with meticulous observation. Every street, building, and park seemed to speak to him, offering lessons about order, movement, and potential. He believed that well-designed spaces could encourage harmony, civility, and well-being. He measured, drew, and planned, understanding that the minutiae, the width of a path, the placement of a tree, the direction of sunlight, could shape daily life in profound ways. His mind moved in layers, practical concerns, aesthetic aspirations, and social impact all intertwined. Each decision was a small stroke on a canvas, intended to shape the lives of countless people, even if they never knew. His name. The second man approached differently, guided by intuition and imagination. He saw not only what existed, but what could be, spaces where people could breathe, relax, and feel connected to both nature and one another. His ideas often felt bold or even improbable to those around him. Where others saw obstacles, he saw opportunity. Where they saw limits, he saw potential. His vision emphasized beauty and experience over strict practicality, and he believed that an inspiring environment could elevate the human spirit, foster joy, and encourage shared responsibility for the world people inhabited. Despite their differences, the men recognized in each other a kindred spirit. They saw that each perspective complemented the other. One provided structure, rules, and measurable outcomes. The other provided imagination, vision, and the capacity to dream beyond constraints. Together, they began conversations that would shape not just designs, but the way communities might live and grow. The dialogue between careful planning and visionary dreaming became a crucible, refining ideas that neither could have fully realized alone. Their collaboration was not without challenge. At times, the practical man worried that the dreamer's ideas were too ambitious, difficult to implement, or costly. Meanwhile, the visionary feared that strict adherence to practicality could stifle creativity and leave spaces lifeless or uninspiring. They argued, negotiated, and tested each other's assumptions, but always with the shared understanding that their ultimate goal was larger than individual pride or preference. In these discussions, compromise became innovation, and debate became a tool to sharpen their shared purpose. The vision they pursued was rooted in the belief that human spaces, whether parks, streets, or neighborhoods, could be more than functional. They could be beautiful, restorative, and socially meaningful. They imagined environments that encouraged people to gather, move, and interact naturally, fostering connections across age, class, and background. Green spaces would not be ornamental alone. They would serve as breathing spaces for communities, places to find calm, inspiration, and belonging. Paths would guide, not confine. Structures would shelter, not dominate. And natural elements would enhance, rather than compete with, human life. This philosophy influenced every choice they made. Trees were placed to offer shade and create intimacy. Walkways were designed for exploration rather than mere transit. Open spaces allowed for gatherings, reflection, or quiet escape. Even minor details such as benches, fountains, or lighting were considered for their ability to shape mood and behavior. Every element, however small, was deliberate, chosen to serve both practical needs and the larger purpose of enhancing human experience. Community input became a subtle part of their process. Though they guided decisions and set standards, they listened to those who would inhabit the spaces. They observed patterns of use, considered feedback, and adjusted plans in response to lived experience. Their vision was not imposed from above. It grew in dialogue with reality, blending ideals with the rhythm of daily life. This openness ensured that the spaces they designed would feel organic, alive, and meaningful, rather than rigid or artificial. The impact of their combined vision was evident in subtle ways. People moved through spaces with ease, discovering quiet corners for reflection or open areas for play and conversation. Strangers encountered one another without friction, and familiar faces were welcomed in ways that encouraged social cohesion. The environment seemed to guide human interaction, not dictate it, fostering spontaneity alongside order. In this harmony of structure and imagination, community life found a rhythm that was both practical and inspiring. Time tested their ideas. Seasons changed, populations shifted, and the spaces they envisioned evolved in response. Yet the underlying principles, careful observation, deliberate planning, and imaginative dreaming, remained consistent. Even as new challenges emerged, the balance between order and possibility ensured that the spaces continued to serve the people who used them, providing continuity amid change. Their vision endured because it was rooted in an understanding of human needs, tempered by creativity and foresight. In quiet reflection, it is clear that the partnership of these two men was more than a collaboration. It was a blending of approaches that allowed a dream to become tangible. The spaces they shaped were more than physical. They were emotional and social landscapes, reflecting a deep understanding of human life. Their work reminds us that thoughtful planning, combined with visionary imagination, can produce environments that nurture connection, foster joy, and endure across generations. Ultimately, the story of these two men demonstrates the subtle power of shared vision. When precision meets creativity, when care meets imagination, the results ripple far beyond initial intentions. The spaces they influenced became stages for daily life, repositories of memory, and symbols of what is possible when different minds work toward a common purpose. In this quiet, yet profound way, their vision continues to shape human experience, offering lessons about collaboration, creativity, and the lasting impact of thoughtful, intentional design. Nature often appears untamed, unpredictable, and wild, but within its seeming disorder lies a subtle rhythm that can be understood. Some people, inspired by the beauty of natural forms, sought to work with this rhythm rather than against it. They wanted to shape landscapes thoughtfully, turning irregularities into harmony while keeping the vitality of life intact. This process was delicate and required a patience that many do not possess. It was not about domination or control. It was about collaboration with the land itself. The first step was observation. Before any paths were drawn or plants arranged, the contours of the land were studied with care. Hills, valleys, watercourses, and existing vegetation were noted. Designers examined how sunlight traveled across the space during different seasons, how winds swept through open areas, and how water naturally collected or dispersed. They noticed patterns in growth, small clearings where plants thrived, and areas where life seemed to struggle. These observations formed the foundation of every decision, ensuring that human interventions worked with nature instead of fighting it. One of the core principles was subtlety. Nothing was placed arbitrarily. Every element had a purpose, whether functional, aesthetic, or emotional. Paths were designed to follow gentle slopes or natural curves, rather than imposing rigid lines. Trees and shrubs were arranged to enhance existing views, create small moments of shelter, or frame open spaces. Even seemingly small details, such as a stone placed near a stream or a flowering bush along a path, were considered carefully for how they would influence the experience of those moving through the space. Patience was essential because landscapes do not change overnight. The process required time for plants to take root, for waterways to settle, and for natural life to adjust to the new balance. Designers understood that growth would not always align perfectly with their plans, and flexibility was necessary. Sometimes, a tree would lean differently than expected, or water would carve a new path through a low area. These occurrences were not failures, but opportunities to adapt and respond to nature's own voice. Balance was another guiding principle. Spaces were created to hold a tension between wildness and order, each enhancing the other. Too much control could make the area feel lifeless, while too little could lead to frustration or chaos. Designers embraced this tension, allowing natural processes to continue while gently guiding them. Streams were left to meander. Within defined boundaries, vegetation was encouraged to grow freely, but in ways that complemented paths or open areas, and wildlife was welcomed as an integral part of the ecosystem. Every design also considered the human experience. The goal was to create spaces that invited exploration, reflection, and quiet enjoyment. Paths meandered in ways that allowed people to discover unexpected views or small clearings. Benches and resting areas were placed in locations that offered comfort without drawing undue attention. Bridges and small crossings were constructed not only for practical movement, but also to create moments of pause where the sound of flowing water or the rustle of leaves could be fully appreciated. Storytelling played a subtle but important role. Each area of a landscape was treated as a scene or chapter where movement, light, and texture could unfold gradually. A winding path might lead to a sunlit meadow, a shade, grove, or a secluded pond. These transitions encouraged attention to detail and reflection. Every step offered something new: the play of light through trees, the gentle curve of a hill, the sudden appearance of flowering plants. Visitors were guided not by signs or instructions, but by the natural flow of the space itself. Practicality and accessibility were also central considerations. While the design sought harmony with nature, it needed to function for those who used it. Paths were built with gentle inclines. Resting areas were comfortable, and sightlines were considered for safety and comfort. These practical measures were incorporated seamlessly, never overwhelming the organic flow of the landscape. They allowed people to feel part of the environment rather than separate from it. Designers often left room for unpredictability, understanding that life is not static. Plants and water, weather and wildlife, all have a voice in shaping a landscape over time. By allowing for flexibility, the designs remained alive, capable of evolving while maintaining coherence. This approach created spaces that were not rigidly fixed but dynamic, responding to the seasons, the growth of trees, and the passage of time. Life was allowed to flourish without being confined to strict rules. The aesthetic of these spaces was understated. Beauty emerged naturally from the careful placement of elements, from the interplay of light and shadow, from the sound of water or rustling leaves. It was no tea ostentatious, it was felt rather than demanded. People were drawn to explore and linger, not because the space shouted its importance, but because it whispered it. Each step revealed small wonders that might otherwise go unnoticed: the curve of a branch, the gentle slope of a meadow, the texture of stone against soft moss. Ultimately, designing nature from chaos was a form of stewardship. It required attentiveness, humility, and respect for the land's inherent intelligence. These landscapes demonstrated that human influence need not erase wildness, but could enhance it, guiding growth without restricting it. In the quiet moments spent walking through these spaces, one could sense the care, patience, and thought embedded in every detail. Through observation, patience, balance, and subtle intervention, disorder was transformed into coherence. The land was allowed to breathe, yet it was shaped into something purposeful, something that nurtured both life and human experience. Every element, from a winding path to a hidden clearing, worked in harmony to create spaces that were calming, inspiring, and alive. In the quiet interplay of light, water, and vegetation, it became clear that chaos itself could be beautiful if approached with care, respect, and vision. Creating a park is often thought of as an act of generosity, a gift to a community or a city. Yet, behind the serenity of green spaces and quiet walks lies a deeper story of trade-offs, choices, and consequences. The vision of a park is seductive: open lawns, tree-lined avenues, meandering paths, and water reflecting the sky. It promises a place for escape, reflection, and connection to nature. But the path to such beauty is rarely simple, and the cost, often invisible, can linger long after the gates are open. The process of forming a park begins with imagining potential. Designers and planners look at the landscape with eyes full of possibility. An empty field can become a meadow, a neglected plot can turn into a grove. Streams that were once hidden or obstructed can be reshaped to flow gracefully through the space. The goal is always harmony, nature, art, and human use working together in quiet balance. But as this vision grows clearer, so too do the realities of transforming it into something tangible. Land must be cleared, structures may need to be removed, and spaces that once served different purposes must find new roles. Each action carries weight, and the outcomes are often more than physical. The creation of a park is, in a way, a negotiation with time. Seasons pass slowly, and the full beauty of the design cannot be realized immediately. Trees take years to grow, plants need careful tending, and waterways must find their natural rhythm. Patience is essential, and every step forward requires thoughtfulness and foresight. Every decision, whether about the placement of a path, the species of a tree, or the angle of a bench, affects not just the immediate impression, but the long-term character of the space. A park is never just a moment in time. It is an evolving story written in soil, stone, and foliage. Yet the transformation of land comes at a cost, often invisible at first glance. Buildings may be removed, streets rerouted, and the lives of those who once occupied the space can be disrupted. Even when intentions are well-meaning, these changes are not neutral. Families and communities may be displaced, local businesses affected, and connections to the land interrupted. Every park carries the memory of what once existed, and the creation of beauty is sometimes inseparable from the loss it entails. These costs are not always measured in money, they are felt in absence, in the quiet spaces where lives were once lived, in the echoes of routines and traditions that must adapt or vanish. Financial considerations are another layer of complexity. A park requires resources, labor, materials, and ongoing maintenance. The initial investment is substantial, but the long-term care is equally demanding. Paths must be repaired, plants tended, water systems monitored, benches and lighting need upkeep, and new features may be added over time. The promise of leisure and beauty is sustained by ongoing work, which often remains invisible to those who stroll through the shaded paths. The cost is both tangible and intangible, the labor that makes it possible and the responsibility to preserve it for future generations. Design decisions are guided by a desire to create inclusivity. Why and accessibility, but achieving these ideals is not always straightforward. Open spaces must be approachable for all, with gentle slopes, smooth paths, and seating that invites rest. Natural elements must be arranged so that every visitor can experience light, shade, and sound without barriers. Thought is given to children, the elderly, and those seeking solitude. Every choice is a delicate balance between aesthetic intention and functional necessity, between natural beauty and human comfort. The goal is to create a space that feels free and welcoming, yet every freedom comes at the cost of careful planning and compromise. The resulting park is a place of quiet reflection, but it is also a testament to negotiation and compromise. Paths are often winding rather than straight, and groves are left intentionally irregular to preserve the natural flow of the land. Waterways are shaped but not constrained, meadows are planted but allowed to self-seed, and trees are guided rather than forced. Every feature is a dialogue between design and nature, a balance that acknowledges both beauty and restraint. The park appears effortless, but each curve, each clearing, each hidden nook is the product of careful thought and subtle intervention. Despite the careful planning, the presence of what was lost remains in subtle ways. The memory of homes or gardens, of quiet corners where life once unfolded, lingers in the atmosphere of the park. Shadows fall in places where walls or fences once stood, and the sound of footsteps sometimes seems to echo past paths that no longer exist. These traces are faint, yet they remind visitors that every landscape carries layers of history. Beauty and loss are intertwined, and the serenity of a park is enriched by the acknowledgement that it was shaped through both generosity and sacrifice. Visitors to the park often sense this balance intuitively. They notice the gentle slope of a hill, the way sunlight filters through leaves, the sound of water as it curves around stones. These elements create a sense of peace and calm, yet the mind may also detect the careful orchestration behind it. There is an awareness, even if unspoken, that the space is maintained, guided, and preserved. This knowledge does not diminish the experience, it enhances it, providing a deeper understanding of the effort, thought, and subtle cost embedded in every feature. Ultimately, a park is born as a space of both beauty and consequence. It offers respite from noise and industry, a chance to walk, reflect, and reconnect with nature. Yet the creation of such spaces is never without trade-offs. the shaping of land, the alteration of ecosystems, and the displacement of prior uses all leave marks that linger in quiet ways. Recognizing these costs does not diminish the joy of the park, rather it deepens appreciation for the complexity behind the calm and inviting landscapes that people enjoy. A park, then, is more than grass, trees, and water. It is an embodiment of patience, thoughtfulness, and negotiation. It reflects human creativity and care, but also the consequences of transformation. The experience of walking through the park is layered. One feels serenity and inspiration. Yet there is a subtle awareness of the labor, the choices, and the sacrifices that made it possible. In this way, every park is a reminder that beauty often comes with a cost, and that careful stewardship is required to maintain both its form and its spirit. In the quiet moments spent in these spaces, one can sense the balance between what was lost and what was created. Each path, grove, and clearing tells a story of attention, intention, and care. A park may offer escape and delight, but it is also a landscape shaped by decisions, responsibilities, and consequences. Its serenity is not accidental. It is the result of mindful design and the acceptance that every transformation carries echoes of both generosity and sacrifice. Even the most carefully nurtured spaces are not immune to the quiet pull of time. What was once new and vibrant can slowly fade into weariness, revealing cracks in both stone and spirit. Decline often begins in subtle ways. A path that was once smooth develops unevenness. Benches show signs of weathering, and the grass that once gleamed green grows patchy under neglect. Nature continues its cycle, indifferent to human intentions, and even the most cared-for areas can begin to show the weight of passing years. Neglect is rarely sudden. It eeps in, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Without regular attention, small issues grow into larger ones. Plants that require tending wilt or spread unchecked, footpaths erode, and the structures meant to provide comfort and guidance begin to fail. The absence of care is a quiet force, often unnoticed until its effects are undeniable. And yet the decline of a place is never just physical. It touches the people who cherish it, subtly reshaping memories and experiences. Spaces that once brought joy can begin to feel distant, unfamiliar, or even forgotten. As neglect grows, it does more than change appearances. It affects the sense of connection between people and place. Visitors may arrive to find areas in disrepair or landscapes overgrown, and the feeling of safety, beauty, or calm may be diminished. What was once a source of inspiration can now carry an echo of disappointment. This slow fading challenges the imagination, reminding people that spaces, like relationships and communities, require attention and care to thrive. Without it, they can drift into quiet abandonment, even when memories of their former vitality remain. Yet even amid decline, there are those who resist forgetting. Individuals, families, and communities often feel a deep responsibility to preserve memory and meaning. They walk the paths carefully, noting changes, repairing what they can, and telling the stories that might otherwise fade. They plant flowers where weeds have taken hold, repaint worn structures, and speak of what the space once meant. These acts are not grand or public, they are intimate, quiet interventions that honor the history and spirit of the place. In these efforts, memory becomes a form of resistance, a way to assert that even as time wears on, significance need not vanish. Preserving memory is not merely about physical repair, it is about awareness and storytelling. The stories associated with a place, its creation, its people, its daily life, serve as anchors, holding the past steady while the present continues to shift. Conversations, photographs, and written records become tools to sustain understanding. Through them, the collective memory of a space is kept alive, resisting the slow erasure that comes with neglect. This fight is often quiet and unseen, but it is no less essential. Without it, the essence of what made the space meaningful could dissolve entirely. Decline and neglect can also reveal underlying fragilities that were present all along. Materials, structures, and ecosystems that once seemed strong may begin to show vulnerability. Trees may succumb to disease, water systems may falter, and pathways can become impassable. These weaknesses are not always immediately apparent, and they require careful observation and intervention. The process of noticing and responding to decline is itself a form of stewardship, a commitment to understanding how a place evolves and how human action or inaction affects it. The fight to remember is as much a socially endeavor as it is physical. Communities often come together to advocate for preservation, to ensure that the narratives tied to a space are not erased by time or oversight. Meetings, letters, and petitions can emerge, aiming to bring attention, resources, or policy support. Even when the work seems slow or fraught with difficulty, the act of caring conveys an important truth. Spaces are meaningful because people remember them. Memory is the bridge between what exists now and what once existed, and the determination to sustain it can make all the difference in whether a place fades quietly or remains alive in consciousness. There is also a psychological element to preservation. When people fight to remember, they are asserting continuity against impermanence. The act of recalling, documenting, and maintaining becomes a way to connect with something larger than the immediate present. In the spaces of decline, small victories, repaired benches, trimmed paths, new plantings, carry significance beyond their physical impact. They are reminders that human care can counterbalance neglect, even if only partially, and that meaning is never entirely lost when attention persists. Over time, cycles of neglect and repair can teach patience and humility. A place cannot be forced into eternal perfection, nor can memories remain fixed in one moment. Nature, time, and human activity all play a role in shaping how a space evolves. A sense of acceptance emerges alongside action. Some changes are reversible, some losses must be acknowledged, and some aspects of beauty will inevitably shift. Yet this understanding does not prevent care, it informs it. Preservation becomes a practice of attentiveness, respect, and mindful effort, rather than a battle to halt every change. The interplay between decline and remembrance also emphasizes resilience. Even spaces that have suffered neglect can regain vitality through thoughtful intervention. Grass can grow back, trees can be nurtured, and structures repaired. Attention can breathe life into areas that seemed beyond recovery, demonstrating that the act of remembering is itself restorative. The care invested in memory and physical preservation can transform a space, creating new layers of meaning and allowing old ones to persist. Ultimately, decline, neglect, and the fight to remember reveal a profound truth. The value of a place is inseparable from the people who care for it. Time and neglect will always challenge any space, but attentive stewardship and memory can maintain its essence. The quiet work of preservation, planting, repairing, telling stories, ensures that meaning endures even as material forms change. In these efforts, there is a deep sense of connection, continuity, and respect, reflecting both the fragility and resilience of the spaces we cherish. The lessons are subtle but clear. Beauty and significance are not automatically sustained. They require awareness, care, and sometimes quiet struggle. Yet in this very strew, jiggle lies hope. Decline can be met with thoughtful action, neglect with patient restoration, and fading memory with deliberate storytelling. Through these choices, spaces continue to matter, carrying the weight of their history even as they remain alive in the present. The fight to remember is not dramatic or loud. It is steady, persistent, and full of quiet strength. Even in the stillness of forgotten corners or the uneven stretch of a path, there is potential. Every act of attention, every story told, every repaired feature is a testament to the enduring human commitment to care. Memory, like nature, has its cycles of dormancy and revival. The quiet struggle against decline and neglect reminds us that places are sustained not by their initial creation alone, but by ongoing dedication, by the conscious effort to hold on to significance, and by the willingness to engage with both loss and possibility. Art has always carried a quiet power, capable of holding memory and meaning in forms that words sometimes cannot reach. It can capture fleeting moments, embody ideas, and preserve experiences long after they might otherwise fade. In spaces where history, change, and human effort intersect, art becomes more than decoration. It transforms into a living symbol, a bridge between past and present, between what was and what continues to be felt. Its presence is often subtle, yet it resonates deeply with anyone who pauses to observe, reflect, or simply be in its vicinity. A living symbol. L is not static. It thrives not only in its material form, but in the ideas, emotions, and actions it inspires. A sculpture, a painting, or a carefully designed landscape can embody memory and meaning, but it becomes fully alive when it engages people. When someone walks past, pauses, and senses the weight of history or beauty, the art achieves its purpose. Memory is no longer confined to personal recollection. It is expressed outwardly, shared, and sustained through human attention. In this sense, art transforms ordinary spaces into places of reflection and significance. Memory and art are intertwined in ways that are both delicate and profound. Memory alone is fragile, easily disrupted by time, absence, or forgetfulness. Art offers a more tangible form of remembrance, preserving what might otherwise be lost. Through form, colour, and texture, it can convey emotion and narrative with precision, creating a vessel that holds experiences across generations. At the same time, the meaning of art is never fixed. It adapts with each viewer, each moment of interaction, allowing memory to remain active, dynamic, and alive rather than frozen. Living symbols often emerge from collaborative effort, drawing together vision, skill, and dedication. They are rarely the product of a single person. Rather, they arise from a shared desire to capture something essential, to express a truth that resonates collectively. The act of creating these symbols is itself meaningful, demanding patience, thoughtfulness, and care. From the initial concept to the final execution, every choice, material, scale, placement, contributes to how the work communicates and endures. In this process, art becomes both an outcome and a journey, a reflection of human attention and intention. One of the most remarkable qualities of living symbols is their capacity to foster connection. People encounter them in different ways. Some pause in quiet contemplation, others are inspired to act or to learn, and still others feel a deep, almost instinctive recognition of meaning. Through these interactions, art sustains memory collectively, creating shared understanding. A symbol that might have begun as a tribute to an event, a person, or an idea becomes a living touchstone, carrying emotional resonance for all who experience it. It is through this exchange that art transcends its material form, achieving a presence that is both timeless and immediate. Art and memory together can also cultivate a sense of place. A carefully designed piece or an enduring symbol can anchor a landscape, providing context and coherence to what might otherwise be experienced as ordinary or disconnected. The presence of art transforms perception, encouraging observers to notice details, to reflect, and to feel a sense of continuity with what has come before. In doing so, living symbols not only preserve memory, they actively shape how people inhabit and relate to a space, creating an awareness of significance that extends beyond aesthetic pleasure. At the heart of this process lies intention. Art does not sustain memory by accident, it requires careful thought and attention. Artists, caretakers, and communities work together to ensure that symbolism remains legible, meaningful, and accessible. Materials are chosen for durability, placement for visibility and engagement, and context for resonance. Even subtle details, such as lighting, color, or the flow of movement around a piece, are considered, as they influence how memory and meaning are perceived. This attention transforms objects into experiences, moments into lasting impressions. Living symbols are also resilient. Even when surrounding conditions change, when seasons pass or landscapes evolve, art can remain a point of reference, a constant amid flux. Its stability provides comfort and guidance, reminding observers of enduring values, histories, or emotions. At the same time, it accommodates growth and reinterpretation, inviting new layers of meaning to emerge as people interact with it over time. This duality, steady yet adaptable, gives living symbols their unique strength and enduring presence. The emotional impact of art cannot be understated. A single encounter can evoke reflection, reverence, or even a sense of transcendence. In this way, living symbols serve not only as reminders of history, but as catalysts for thought, empathy, and connection. They encourage viewers to pause, to listen to their own feelings, and to consider the broader significance of what they observe. In doing so, art extends memory beyond personal recollection into a shared, almost sacred space of awareness and respect. Art also plays a role in education and cultural continuity. It offers a way to communicate lessons, values, and experiences across generations. Unlike text or spoken word, visual or spatial art can reach people regardless of language, literacy, or prior knowledge. It presents meaning in forms that are often universally accessible, allowing memory to persist even when the context around it changes. In this sense, living symbols are both guides and guardians, preserving stories and insights while inviting new reflection and understanding. Finally, the presence of art and living symbols reminds us of human creativity and perseverance. They demonstrate that memory and meaning can be preserved not only through documentation, but through imaginative expression and sustained care. The creation and maintenance of such symbols require vision, patience, and commitment, and the result is a space enriched by history, narrative, and emotional resonance. In these quiet, intentional acts, the essence of memory is made tangible, and the spirit of a place is continually renewed through observation, interaction, and appreciation. In the stillness of contemplation, a living symbol can become a focal point for thought and reflection. It offers a sense of continuity, connecting the present moment to layers of experience, an understanding that me, et otherwise remain unseen. Through attention, observation, and care, the art achieves its full purpose, a tangible expression of memory, a point of connection for individuals and communities, and a reminder of the enduring power of human intention to shape, preserve, and honor meaning. Ultimately, living symbols illustrate a profound truth. Memory is most potent when it is embodied, and art is most powerful when it inspires reflection and connection. By merging material presence with emotional resonance, they preserve what matters, sustain stories, and invite ongoing engagement. In every careful brushstroke, sculpted form, and deliberate placement, the delicate interplay of art and memory demonstrates that significance endures when it is both remembered and experienced, quietly shaping perception and consciousness long into the future. Even in the midst of a city's bustle, there exists a quiet pulse, a heart of green that sustains life, reflection, and calm. This green heart is more than simply grass, trees, or gardens. It is a living space where nature and humanity intersect in subtle, enduring ways. It offers a place to breathe, to notice the gentle movements of wind and leaves, to hear the soft hum of birds and the faint rustle of life unfolding around us. In this space, the world slows, inviting contemplation and quiet joy. A green heart thrives not only through its flora and fauna, but through the care and attention it receives. Every path worn by footsteps, every bench placed under the shade of a tree, every corner left to bloom naturally reflects human intention to nurture and preserve. Nature itself is resilient, but it flourishes most when humans act as stewards rather than mere spectators. The act of tending, planting, or simply maintaining awareness allows this heart to keep beating, season after season, year after year. Walking through such a space, one feels a subtle shift in perception. The constant rhythm of city life, the hurried footsteps, the distant horns, the endless movement, begins to fade, replaced by smaller, quieter rhythms. Sunlight filters through leaves in shifting patterns, water sparkles in fountains or streams, and wind carries soft fragrances of grass, flowers, and earth. Each of these details, often overlooked in the rush of daily life, becomes magnified here, reminding observers of the richness that surrounds them when they pause to notice. This green heart is also a space of connection. It is where people meet, rest, reflect, or simply pass through, yet it offers a shared experience of nature's quiet presence. A child's laughter might mingle with the call of a bird, a jogger's rhythmic steps align with the swaying branches, or a solitary visitor might find solace on a shaded bench. In these moments, the green heart becomes communal without demanding attention. It offers a gentle invitation rather than a directive, allowing everyone to interact with it in their own way. Seasonal changes are particularly remarkable. In such spaces. Spring brings blossoms and new growth, a delicate reminder of renewal and beginnings. Summer offers shade and warmth, the leaves forming a soft canopy for respite. Autumn transforms the landscape with vibrant colours, each falling leaf a subtle sign of transition and impermanence. Winter, though often quieter, allows the structure of trees, the patterns of frost, and the soft hush of cold air to create its own kind of beauty. In every season, the green heart continues to pulse with life, resilient and ever-changing, yet always present. This living space also embodies memory in gentle, almost imperceptible ways. Trees may mark the passage of decades, their growth rings recording years of sun and rain. Pathways show the imprint of countless footsteps, quiet traces of those who have wandered, rested, or simply passed through. Even flowers and shrubs which bloom and fade annually become part of a continuum, a living record of cycles and care. Each element holds a story, a layer of quiet significance woven into the fabric of the space. The presence of water adds another layer of vitality to the green heart. Streams, ponds, or fountains reflect the sky, ripple with life, and create a calming auditory backdrop. The gentle movement of water reminds observers of continuity and flow, a natural rhythm that mirrors the cycles of life itself. Birds and small creatures find sustenance there, while people find both a visual and emotional reprieve. In combination with greener, water establishes a multisensory environment that nourishes both body and spirit. A green heart is also a refuge. In a world dominated by concrete, noise, and constant activity, these spaces offer quietude without isolation. They provide a sense of breathing room, a pause from the weight of obligations, and a gentle invitation to reflect. Visitors may notice their own thoughts settling, emotions softening, and attention returning to the small, essential details of life. Even a brief encounter can leave a lingering impression, reminding one of the restorative power of nature. Yet, the vitality of a green heart depends on respect. People, plants, and creatures all share the space, and harmony requires awareness. Littering, unnecessary destruction, or careless disturbance threatens the delicate balance that allows life to flourish. By moving gently, observing attentively, and interacting responsibly, visitors ensure that the pulse of the green heart remains steady. In this way, each person contributes, however subtly, to the ongoing life of the space, maintaining its vibrancy for themselves and for future generations. The green heart also inspires creativity and reflection. Writers, artists, and thinkers have long sought such spaces as sources of insight, where the mind can wander freely, untethered from pressure and distraction. Nature's subtle complexity, patterns in leaves, the interplay of light and shadow, the rhythm of wind through branches, stimulates observation and imagination. In these moments, the green heart is not only a physical space, but a mental and emotional sanctuary, offering a quiet canvas for thought and expression. In its essence, the green heart reminds us of the value of persistence and care. Life continues within it because of the attention it receives, because of the choices made to protect, plant, and maintain. Its resilience mirrors our own capacity to nurture, observe, and sustain what is important. By quietly existing, the green heart teaches that even amid change, growth, and impermanence, some forms of life and beauty endure when supported with patience and intention. Even as cities around it evolve, grow, and transform, this green heart continues to pulse with vitality. It does not demand notice, yet those who enter find themselves drawn into its quiet rhythm. Birds take flight, leaves sway, water ripples, and sunlight dances across surfaces, all ordinary yet extraordinary, ordinary yet sustaining. Here, life persists, quietly affirming itself in ways both visible and intangible. Ultimately, the green heart that still beats is more than a space. It is a reminder of care, resilience, and the enduring presence of life amid the constant flow of time. It invites observation, reflection, and quiet participation, offering both sanctuary and connection. Through attention and respect, it continues to sustain those who encounter it, carrying the calm pulse of life forward, patiently and persistently, in a world that is always moving yet still finds space to breathe.